recording stopped.
Yeah, I want to record it to the cloud and I accidentally clicked record to my computer. So sorry about that.
First of all, I haven't updated the year of this slide, so let's just skip skip that. So Julian gave a little bit of my background. Yeah, I was a winemaker, then came back to the GSM to learn how to be a winery GM or to learn the really tough business side of the wine business and start my own winery. But while I was here, I won the Big Bang Business Plan competition. I graduated in 2008, and there were no jobs in 2008. But because I had won Big Bang, I had investors who were willing to give me money to start a company. And so I started a company, and that was called Inventopia. I took that all the way through its development arc, raised $2.6 million, all from angel investors, which during the Great Recession, which was like squeezing blood out of rocks. Very proud that I was able to get that done. We ended up selling about 35 million units before licensing the technology to a publicly traded company in the space. And then having seen how hard it was to develop a research-backed company like that, there's so many things that were inefficient, so many things that were just harder than they should have been. That inspired me to start Inventopia, which is basically lab space and shop space with a bunch of equipment. You can come as a person with just an idea, with the kind of money that you earn at Starbucks, and start working on your idea. You don't have to have venture funding in order to start working on your idea in Inventopia. And so I do that. That's not my job. That's a gig I do. I started it. I pay the bills. I collect. It's kind of a co-op. And right now I pay my bills as a consultant for my consultancy is called Aggie Industries. I do early stage prototyping. And right now, as we speak, the building I'm in is actually a Inventopia alumni company called Interplant, which makes soybeans. They're working on soybeans. They're going to end up doing other crops that glow in response to pathogen stress. So if they're getting infected by a fungus, they will actually express a fluorescent protein. So that's on the left here. You can see there's a plant that's glowing over another one. And the kind of stuff I do is develop the sensors and the stuff to see this glowing. That blue image in the lower left-hand corner, that's actually at Inventopia. That's our workshop space there. And that's one of our sensors shining blue light at these plants. And then you can see if they're glowing, if they've been infected in response. That's 80% of my time. I'm a consultant to them, and 20% of the time I'm working on a consumer product. It's a 3D pen. If you guys have seen, we're going to talk a lot about the 3D pen. So if you haven't come across what a 3D pen is, you might want to look it up, because I'm going to use that as an example a little later. I've always wanted to have a 3D pen that wasn't a toy, that actually worked really well. It's basically the hot part of a 3D printer, and you can just kind of extrude plastic and you can build whatever the hell you want. So in my off time, the 20% of the time I'm not working for Interplant, I'm developing that. I'm going to bring that to market on Kickstarter this spring is the plan. Any questions thus far? If there are questions, please just interrupt me or raise a hand, and we can do that. Especially with the group this small, it's we can sidetrack. Don't worry about interrupting me. That said, kind of getting into business, the purpose of any business plan, the reason why we do business plans, is to answer all the questions and to see, is your venture feasible, right? And that's a mix of the technology part of the equation, the market part, and the financials. And that's the financials is what we're digging into, but it's kind of part of the overall. And what we're going to do tonight is do a little bit of review of what the kind of different business models that are possibly out there, because there's a lot of ways you can make money as a business. But then really focus on producing the most critical part of your business plan. And it's a part that I think most entrepreneurs are the least excited to do, which is the numbers. And it can look imposing when you look at these pro forma P&L sheets. It's really not. And I think it's actually fun. I'm a kind of guy, I never liked math in school. I love doing P&Ls. So we'll just talk about what the research that you do to build that. That'll tell you how big your business could be, how much money you might expect to make. If you need to raise money, they'll tell you how much money it's going to take to get there. and whether or not it's really a good use of your time. One of my favorite quotes is, money isn't everything, but it is right up there with oxygen, especially in the context of a startup. You run out of money, you're done. So it's important to get that right. So first example that I want to kind of broadly make is bring up Rare Disease Day, which happens every year. Have you guys ever heard of this? Rare Disease Day is a nonprofit, and there's all these conditions that people have where there's like 5 people who suffer from it, and it might be a chronic disease, it might be something that's potentially deadly, but so few people have it that it's hard to get the attention of the medical industry. And the reason we have this thing called Rare Disease Day, the reason why there's a nonprofit doing this, is because, you know, we know the pharmaceutical industry, right? They, you know, find a problem that people are willing to spend money on, whether it's erectile dysfunction or, you know, kidney disease or a lot of things. There's a lot of problems, medical problems that people are willing to pay for. And most of the time, the amount of money that you can make solving the problem is more than the cost of solving the problem. We have Rare Disease Day because it's not always the case. There might be 5 people with a rare condition, and the cost of producing a cure is larger than the cost of the problem. And so the economic balance, the free market will never take care of that. And so that's why there is a nonprofit trying to bridge that gap. For you, you need to, if you're an entrepreneur, you're going to do something in the for-profit sphere, you're not going this way. You need to find places where the cost of the solution is less than the cost of the problem. That way you can charge less than the cost of the problem and make a little bit of margin. This is an obnoxious slide. I just want to say there's a lot that goes into it, right? The cost of the problem has to be greater, not just than the cost of the pill I give you, but the cost of the R&D to make that pill and the marginal cost per pill, plus a bunch of overhead. And so an equation like this looks obnoxious, and it is, but the reason we do the pro formas is to figure out kind of what this equation is and do it in a way that you can see and you can understand, because I look at an equation like that and I go cross-eyed. So before we get too deep into that, we're going to talk about a little bit about, there are a billion different ways. Is in the chat, is that a question? Get a copy of the presentation. Yes, you can have a copy of the presentation. Whoops, I'm going to go back. And now all right. Sorry. Couldn't get rid of that. So yeah, so first we're going to talk about the differences. Oh, no, that's not it. Oh, sorry, I forgot I had this example in here. So this is a company that I used to work for. I co-founded it, but left it. And there's a fun story of why I left it, which is very, very much relevant to some of your experiences that might even happen during the Big Bang. But this is an example of the cost of the problem. This is AmCyt is making a machine that helps hospitals do biopsies better. It would basically reduce the number of times you would have to repeat a biopsy procedure. And I want to just give one example of the kind of research that goes into validating a business proposition, right? The title of today's talk is Define and Validate, right? This is just one example of how you validate it, and we'll do another one with the 3D pen. In this case, if one of the most common cancers is thyroid cancer, and the doctor will put a needle into your neck, biopsy the tissue there, pull it out, smear that sample on a slide, look at it, and while you're there in the hospital, they want to look at it and know if they got a good sample. If they miss, you have to come back. And so that when you have to come back, that means your first biopsy was non-diagnostic. That's this ND rate you see in these slides. And so I looked at this and I said, okay, well, how much do these missed biopsies actually cost? And if you notice at the bottom, there's a bunch of links. I always do this for every sort of thing, is like go out there and do research and look for pieces of data that are credible, right? So I have American Health Association.org statistics. I have things from the national, I forget which, it's from NIH. And you can see that, the average hospital does 500 procedures like this per year. At a 20, we know how much those procedures cost. And we know that at a 20% non-diagnostic rate, the cost to them is $260,000 of basically wasted money. And if we could reduce that 20% rate down to 8%, which is what the technology, from what we already knew it could do, we realized we can save that hospital $156,000 per year. That also sets the limits for how expensive our device can be, right? If you want the hospital to be able to pay off that piece of equipment in that year. Okay, so that bottom number, that 156, was a very important number for us, because this average hospital, if we charged $160,000, it was almost better for them to just eat a high failure rate for their thing, assuming that a 1-year payback on an acquisition is what they wanted. Not necessarily the case, actually, but then from that data, I was able to find, okay, how many hospitals are in the United States? How many of them are average hospitals of that type? And then how many hospitals are there in the world? And I could get from this one number of $156,000 savings up to the ability to say, we can save the global medical industry $2.6 billion, right? Anytime you, with a business plan, you can use the B word as a good one. And all of that is something, are these numbers perfect? No. But these are numbers that I could walk into a presentation with an investor and they say, well, how big is this problem? I've never heard of non-diagnostic FNA biopsies. You can say, well, walk you through it. These are the steps. These are the numbers, and this is why it's a problem. So this is the kind of thing you need to be able to do. You need to be able to define the problem kind of at this size. And you're doing that. I mean, we're talking about writing a business plan, and I do want to kind of say this, having lived it, right? I entered the Big Bang, I wrote a business plan, then I started the company and lived that life for 10 years. Winning business plan competitions are great, but the real value is to you, right? And a lot of times, the first few times I tried writing a business plan, I would get to a thing, I would say, oh, I actually don't know what to write here. Or I have an Excel spreadsheet and it's like, oh, what's my marketing expenses? I don't know what to put into that cell. Sometimes going through the exercise of doing this teaches you the questions you don't yet know, and it will prompt an ability to do the research and find those unknowns. So key questions are going to be, how do you make money? That's the business model portion. And then start quantifying it. How much will you make? How much will it cost? When will it happen? And the micro hypothesis is that for you to have a business plan where you say, hey, this business is something I want to do with my life, is that all the goals are achievable, the numbers come out, and it's something that can get to a scale where it actually makes sense for you to do it with your time, which means at the bottom line is you have a viable company. And your challenge is to validate it, both be able to present it to someone else that this is real, but then also for you, I think most people I meet through the Big Bang, the students, the people who are in my shoes 20 years ago, everybody discounts how hard it is. It's really hard. It's not fun. It costs people their marriages sometimes. It didn't me, but I chose very well my choice of spouse. But entrepreneurship sucks, and you really shouldn't do it unless you have to, unless you couldn't live with yourself for not doing it. So you need to validate it, not just for the investors, but also for you. Because you need to really, if you're not totally convinced that this is a great thing and you're going to make $1 billion or however, whatever your number is, billion is too much. Then so this is to no small extent an exercise for you. Any questions on any of that so far before we kind of dig into types of business models? Okay, seeing none. These are the different revenue models, right? The different ways that you can pull money in. One is unit sales. I sell you a phone. It's $600. I give you the phone, you give me $600. Advertising fees, like Facebook and Google are mostly you are the product that they're selling advertisements to. Franchise fees. If you are McDonald's, the corporate McDonald's, they get charged a fee for everyone who opens a McDonald's, and then they sell them the units. Actually, McDonald's has a really cool business model that involves the real estate, but that's way too much. Utility fees. If you are PG&E or SMUD, you can sell a good, you run a wire to it, and I charge you for the electricity I'm delivering to you. Subscription fees, a lot of times, like Netflix is like this: fixed price, providing access to all of the content on my platform. A lot of online companies are subscription fees. Or transaction fees if you are Visa or MasterCard, or your Apple Pay. Every single time you click your phone and pay for your Starbucks, Apple is taking a sliver of that transaction as a transaction fee, 3 to 5%. And then license fees. License fees are great. Actually, Interplant, where I'm at, it's a plant genetics company, but their whole business model is eventually to own the rights to the DNA that they're creating. And so when anyone reproduce that, there's whole seed companies that will be propagating and growing the seeds that farmers will be planting, and Interplant will just be making money for the fact that those people are using their DNA. That's a really sophisticated thing. But also license fees are, if you have a name, like if you are Shaquille O'Neal, you sell the rights to put your image, on some shoes, and just you have that sort of that kind of endorsement deal. So that was how do you make money, and this is how you quantify how much money you've made, right? So if you're selling a widget, your income is the price per unit times how many units, right? This, I won't go through all of these. It's basically the same thing, right? It's the unit cost times how many. And then how much will it cost? Some of these things, like going back to license fees, which was the bottom one, Interplant is Inventopia alumni company. They raised 16 million from John Deere, and which pays for all I think there's 30 people here now. They'll probably raise twice that in a Series B. So a lot of money to do the science, to develop these crops, to develop the systems, to detect when these things are done. But eventually, they'll have a business model where they have developed this thing. The cost of developing these crops is high, plus ongoing kind of R&D. But at the end, they have this licensing revenue, and so it actually works out really well for them. Subscription fee, like if you are PG&E, you have how much it costs is the cost to maintain your lines, plus the cost for fuel for the power plants and stuff like that. It's all pretty basic, but this changes based on the context of your business model, right? And of course, the bottom line is that the money coming in, it's got to be bigger than the money going out. In the case of a widget company, you have prices, the unit price times the unit sold, and your expenses is not just the cost of the unit sold, but you have cost of development, if there's engineering done to develop it. Then you also have your per unit cost. And then if you need an accountant and you need a website and you need all these other things, these operating costs, all those things go into it. And the pro forma that we're developing is going to capture all of that. It's going to make it really simple. Yeah, and note, this is not an equal sign. The revenue has to be bigger. It can be 10 times bigger. It can be 1.1 times bigger. It just has to be bigger. So any questions on any of that so far? That's the very, very basics. So the big question is, how do we do that? And how do we estimate the revenue and costs? How do we kind of prove that we have a functioning, viable business model? And the first step is to build a model. And this is a spreadsheet. You're going to do this in Excel or in Google Sheets, and find as good data as you can to build into that model. And when you can't find really, really good data, use assumptions. The example I gave you before, I found a lot of different references for like how many hospitals are there in the US. I could find that number pretty well, and that was a pretty good number. But how many of those hospitals are a candidate for buying that device is an assumption. And I made a cutoff metric saying if they're doing 500 of these things, they're probably, in our target. So I was able to come up with a number of hospitals that do more than 500 biopsies per year. It's an impossible number to actually know for sure, but can I make an estimate that's reasonably close and that you could show to an investor and they're like, oh, okay, that makes sense as an assumption. That's all you have to do. So if you can find perfect data, then great. If not, use assumptions. I'm going to show you a rather extreme example of that that I'm currently doing. And it's okay to guess. One of the themes, I don't know if anyone's been to the previous things, but one of the things that Joe Nunzio and Andy Harganon keep talking about is what's the $5 experiment? What's the $50 experiment? Having a great business idea and marinating on it until it's perfect is like the worst way to do. You want to always be testing things and always be advancing your idea by validating it, running little experiments, having conversations with people, buying coffee for someone and picking their brain, or producing a prototype and taking it to an investor. So it's okay to guess, but just get in the ballpark. And then as you start researching, you're going to start to figure out where your blind spots are. And the key is to define a clear vision, to make some assumptions, but then test and try to validate them, and then learn, rinse, and repeat. I'll tell you, for VinPerfect, I think, every single time I restarted my financial model for the company, I incremented, it was VinPerfect Financials V1, V2. Every single time I started over and created a different financial model for the company, I would go up one. For AmCyt, the medical device company that I was previously with, in 6 months, no, I was with them for a year and a half, but I was up to V6 on those financials. I had restarted the whole entire financial model. What I'm about to show you, I had restarted it from scratch based on what I had learned 6 times. With VinPerfect, which I ran for 10 years, I was up to version 19. So it's okay for these models to suck. I would take an entrepreneur who has a really bad model that has some specific data and some assumptions in it over someone who says, I don't know. I'm pretty sure the market's big enough, right? It's better to be specifically wrong than vaguely right. So what we're getting towards is what you see here is this big table of numbers, which is a pro forma. It's also called a P&L, or which is a profit and loss statement. And they look intimidating, but once you learn how to read them and create them, this is the clearest way to see exactly what's happening with your business. It's dynamic. It shows you all the different categories of revenue and expenses, which come down vertically, and then it shows you how that changes over time as you go left to right. And again, you don't need to have a P&L this long in order to play. You could have something that is, 3 issues by 5 years and you're golden. Remember, make the smallest investments in pushing this thing forward as you possibly can. Baby steps, use what you have in front of you all the time. That said, the standard pro forma, this P&L has these elements. People will use the term what's your top line sales? That's a reference to here, which is the top line in these pro formas is always your sales, your revenue. You start with the money coming in, and then you start deducting from the money that comes in. You start deducting from that top line all the different cost categories, and then you get to your bottom line. The categories tend to be your sales, the cost of those sales. The difference between those is your gross margin. We're doing MBA vocab here. From that, you will deduct your operating expenses, or OpEx, which can include R&D, your payroll, your marketing, subscriptions. I have a Google Mail account. I have to, pay a website developer, a programmer to hit. All those things are in your operating expenses. Then you deduct your financing expenses. Like if you took out a loan and you're paying interest on that loan, that'd be a financing expense. If you have a lot of capital equipment, which you're depreciating, you would take that out next. Then you only pay taxes on everything after that depreciation. So the taxes are calculated then, and then you get to the bottom, which is your net profit or loss. For more of the kind of MBA lingo, jingo, jargon, EBITDA is a word you will hear, and you'll hear it later in this presentation. EBITDA stands for earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. EBITDA is basically a raw amount of money that your business is making. It's used quite a bit in valuations for sale, because let's say if you are a company and you have heavily leveraged your company with debt to buy the inventory that you have. You've taken out a debt for your inventory. A bigger company may not need to go into debt in order to build up inventory. And so you want to be able to look at the fundamentals of the company outside of the context in which you've done the financing of it. That's more of a raw evaluation of how good your company is actually performing. Net operating income is after that is a huge deal in terms of your personal butt in the seat as an entrepreneur. Your net operating income should be positive. And EBT is, I've never actually had to use it. That's earnings before taxes, but it is a term you'll see. So this is the same game that we play, and you play this for every single time period in your P&L. It starts the same way every single year or every single time period in your P&L. Starts with sales, and you start deducting from sales. Now, of course, as time goes on, your sales are going up. You might have, if you have like a science-backed startup, Interplant, this company is probably going to be 10 years before they have any sales. VinPerfect was 4 years before I had any sales. And so you're going to end up going negative, and you need to know how much you're going to need to go negative. But that said, the kind of the suggestion that I have is that you could start, if this seems intimidating, by just looking at 3 factors over 5 years. Try to develop a thumbnail sketch of what's happening based on, like, maybe at the most 3 different factors, and over the course of 5 years. I remember I once wrote a business plan where I started going into the detail of, like, how many employees do I have, and they're going to need a copy of Windows on their machine and also Microsoft Office. And so I was looking up the prices of that and trying to figure out, like, how much do the computers cost for each. You, like, don't need to do that, right? Keep it to try to keep it to the big numbers, and just for 5 years. So a simple pro forma that you might want to try, and I would say, for the purposes of the Big Bang, you want to at least have something that's this good. Is looking at 3 factors. Do I have, which might be how many customers you have, how many units. This is I think a educational robotics example. How many units of this widget does each customer get? Or maybe this is a subscription service. I don't know. How many costs per unit? That gets you to your revenue model. And then the 3 biggest, most impactful cost factors, like how many employees do I have? What's the cost of the widgets? And what's my cost of, here we call it, in this example, it's customer acquisition cost, but that's your marketing budget, right? And you do that over 5 years. Any questions on that so far? That's the bare bones of a pro forma. This is already a lot easier to digest than what we talked about before. But I'll try to make it even easier by giving you an example. So this is, I mentioned I have this 20% of my time I run Inventopia, and I'm also making a 3D pen. 3D pens are a thing that's been around since 2014. They are little 3D printers that you hold in your hand, and you can move them around, and you can deposit plastic wherever you want, and you can build stuff with them. And they were developed, again, in 2014. They got knocked off pretty viciously. There's a lot of different brands out there. There's one company called WobbleWorks that has some patents on it. It was it was one of the more successful Kickstarters in its day, but they were all developed as toys. I have had 2 commercial 3D pens. They both broke pretty quickly. And I run a makerspace. I do a lot of 3D printing and prototyping. I want one for welding together 3D prints. I want one for doing something. And I'm the kind of person who likes to invest in having quality tools. And so for a number of years now, I have thought, I want a high quality 3D pen. Why has no one made high quality 3D pen? I want a high quality, pro version of the 3D pen. All the ones out there are toys and they break and I hate them. And so last year we had a makeathon at my makerspace, and I said, I'm gonna make it. And I made it and I showed it to people and they liked it. And I got enough feedback. I said, all right, I'm gonna do this. So we're gonna give you the example of me. And so right now, the status of this, the things in this picture here, those are my version 9 prototypes. Version 6 prototype is the 4th one from the back. I've been over the past year using my spare time to iterate and come up with these 3D printers. And I'll probably launch this on Kickstarter in the next couple months. First thing that I think is most important is that I made prototypes and I took them to the market. This is at the Maker Faire in San Francisco. It was in Mare Island this year. Went there for a 2-day event. And I had 3 of them. You can see I'm focusing on one kid, but I had 3 of them there. And I talked to the kids. I talked to their parents. I asked them, how, what do you think of this? Is this something you would buy? How much would you spend for something like this? And I heard from teachers who said, oh, this is a 3D pen that works. I have a bucket of dead 3D pens. And I said, oh, that's interesting. Like, how much would you spend? They're like, well, I buy almost anything because I have to write a grant in order to buy these for teachers. And so if you give me something that's reliable, I'd be willing to spend quite a bit. Start thinking. Learned a lot by taking it out there and just talking to customers. So there is no replacement for customer engagement, right? There's no replacement for doing that $5 experiment of buying someone coffee and picking their brain, or making a really crappy prototype and taking it out and showing someone and getting their feedback. There's no replacement for that. That should be your #1 job if you have an early stage business idea. Now, there's the question then, right? Is to say, okay, that's cool. I've talked to people at the Maker Faire. They might want to buy this. Is this real? Is this big enough for me to make money on it? And there are no great sources of data for this, but I wanted to show you what I have gone through in terms of making the decision to push forward with this. And it's really janky, but it's fine. And one example is this, and it's a little embarrassing. If you go to Amazon, you can look up 3D pen, and they give you this little data you see in the circle. It says 4,000 plus bought in the last month. That's market data. You can scroll down and get that same piece of data for every single brand that is sold on Amazon, which I did, and put it into, I have the units per month that they say they sold times the price point. And I'm looking at that and I can get a feel for, is it perfect? No. But I can get a feel for how many 3D pens and how much money is being spent on Amazon on 3D pens. And this is that data. So, and of course, Amazon is not the only place people are selling 3D pens, but it's data, right? That's right. And and then from there, I can start to say, okay, these are cheap 3D pens. If you look at it, the average price point's around, like $50. When I went to the Makeathon, I kind of asked people what they felt they would be willing to pay, and people didn't balk when I said $250. They weren't excited about that price point, but they weren't scared of it. And my kind of gut from having built some prototypes it makes me think that's kind of needs to be where it is. So I think 250 might be a decent price point. So I start making assumptions. In green here, you have this 2%, 5%, 10%. That's me asking myself, how much of this market, how many participants in this market might be willing to buy a pro version of the same tool? And if it's 2% of that market, and this is just the Amazon market, then you're looking at, and you do the math, you say, okay, if it's only 2%, then I could sell 6,600 per month, just on Amazon. Or, and I could be making $1.6 million. Those might be annualized. Those are annual. That's not per month. That's an annual number. So 6,000 per year on Amazon, making $1.6 million. Okay. If it's, I circled 5% because you'll see that I've taken that number, and taken it forward, and you say, okay, the market size based on the Amazon numbers by themselves, $4 million is what I could potentially make selling 16,000 of these. We'll keep moving. Another data point that I found was this article in Forbes, that talks about the company behind the original thing called 3Doodler. And they say the company itself stated that in the time between their founding and when this article was published, they had sold 2.5 million of these 3D pens. That's a very good data point. It doesn't tell me they have multiple lines. It doesn't tell me which of their multiple lines, but it gives me a number that I can annualize. And that's a good, that works out to, that one company is selling 312,000 per year. And I know based on the Amazon data that I had in the previous slide, that the products that came from this company are about 40% of the sales that are happening on Amazon. So I can make another assumption saying, okay, if they're saying they're selling 312 per year, and if the Amazon data is representative and that's 40% of the total market, then the entire market is this green number here, 781,000 per year. Again, is this a correct number? No, it's not. Do I have a basis for thinking it might be vaguely right? Yes, I do. Does that make sense? It's crazy, but this is the only way you can get to a number like this. And then from there, you can say, okay, that might be the total universe of 3D pen sales. And then I ask myself the same question: of that market, can I convert 2% to being a pro 3D pen? Can I convert 5%? Can I convert 10%? And you can see here, I grabbed the 5% number, which means the total, I'm calling this our total addressable market. The total population of people that might be willing to buy this, whether or not I'm successful at selling it to them or not, is about 40,000 units per year. Any questions on that? Again, it doesn't have to be great data. This data is far from perfect. I'm admitting that. But the spirit of this exercise is that it's much better to be specifically wrong than vaguely right. When I started VinPerfect, I told you I went through 19 different versions of my numbers there. And every single time I came, as I did that, I started to look at it. There's a sense of unease that I have as an entrepreneur behind these numbers. And that's a healthy thing, right? It shows me where I need to be on the lookout for better data. And when if I do stumble across that, let's say maybe I end up going and talking to somebody from that company, or I find someone who is currently making a 3D pen. Right now, I'm talking to manufacturers that I might partner with in selling this thing, and they might have some insight. So when I know where my blind spots are, I can always be on the lookout to find better data and then incorporate that into my model. But all of that said, it's better to be specifically wrong than vaguely right. I know these numbers aren't correct, but they're based on something that's real. And so we're looking for a rough order of magnitude sort of data. And I would feel comfortable talking to an investor. I don't need investors for this, but it's part of the point. But I would be comfortable talking to an investor and saying, this is the data. This is about the size of the market. And, with the caveat that I understand this data isn't perfect, I would stand behind it, right? Again, trying to get into the ballpark. So the next question, and I was going to say, in years past when I've done this thing, this is the point where I ask you guys to make your own pro formas. In an in-person context, that's already like pulling teeth. I think doing this on Zoom, it would be even harder. So that's why I'm just working through my own example. I'm going to basically walk you through that sort of thing. So what I've done here is I've set up a table On the right, you see is the pro forma. It's just a few different lines. And on the left, I have my assumptions that drive that pro forma. I have assumptions in blue on the left, and the ones in green are what I call scenario adjusters, for lack of a better term. Hand up, I'll answer the question.
Yes, hi. Thank you, Tim, so much for your time. Actually, before you get into this, I wanted to ask on the previous example.
Mhm.
You mentioned like it's better to be specifically wrong than vaguely correct. When we are presenting this to investors, do they know that those are our assumptions, or how do we frame it so that one, we do sound like we know what we're doing, and we're not just making things out of thin air,
Yeah.
making things up?
Yeah, great question. So the answer is to be explicit about your assumptions. And that the kind of pinkish slide that I showed earlier about the medical device, that came out of my investment deck. It was literally just a drag and drop out of my investment deck there. And so one of the things you do is you cite your sources. So anytime you have an actual data point, you say, this is this study. You will find, and in the example of that company, I did find multiple conflicting statistical sources for like how many thyroid procedures are done in the US. You know, they were different by about like 30%. The data conflicted. So I would, you know, in that case, I would say, okay, I have an average, and I would list both data sources, and you call that out. A lot of times, if I'm doing it in Excel, I will put the link to the scientific paper or to the website or to whatever right in there with the data. And then, as you'll see here, like in this blue cells, I'm specifically calling out, these are my assumptions. They're assumptions. Any seasoned entrepreneur, any investor understands that all projections are speculative, right? When you fill out subscription documents, when you actually sell equity in your company, you get a stack of paper about that thick. As the investor, they have to fill it out, and it's page after page after page after page of disclosures that the numbers you're representing here are false, right? Like saying, I know these aren't right. Not to make it political, but it is timely. The whole thing about fraud that's happening with Donald Trump in that court case in New York, his whole thing is basically saying, hey, I have these valuations, they're subjective, do your own research. You're going to sign, before you give me this bank loan, you're going to sign off on the fact that you need to do your own due diligence. My valuations are an estimate, right? He took that to this logical extreme, to the point where you could say that's not really an estimate anymore. It's more like wishful thinking. But that same process is in play in those sort of things. You, as an entrepreneur, you need to put forward a good faith effort to get your numbers right. And the investors are going to have to put forward a good faith effort to check your assumptions. And that's why I try to make it easy by linking my things. Beyond that, if you had no causal link between your data and what you're saying, I could write a pro forma like this that's going to show how I'm going to make $1 billion selling bubble gum that I scrape off the bottom of the table I'm sitting at. You know, you can make up businesses out of whole cloth if you don't actually do that. So yeah, so you just call out the fact that it's an assumption, you point to the data, and you say, this is the best data I could find, what do you think? And you just have that conversation openly and honestly. Yeah, good.
Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions before we dive into this? All right, so this is the simple pro forma for the 3D pen. And you'll see I have in the blue on the left, I have TAM, which is total addressable market, right? That's my assumption for how many people I think might possibly ever want to buy an expensive version of a 3D pen. Again, it's an assumption, and it's here in blue. I have this assumption based on conversations with potential customers at one event, and one event only, talking to maybe 60 people, that I might be able to sell these for $250. Not a great data point, but it's not based on nothing either. My cost per unit based on the engineering I've done, I think I can get it down to 150. Again, that's still a number that's in play, but I'm currently working with manufacturers trying to figure out what that number is. If that number comes in at 250 and I'm breaking even on all my units, I'm going to rethink this entire thing. And then below that, I have another assumption, which is marketing at 10% of revenue. That is a rule of thumb that is super stupid, and it's a placeholder for now. And the point is that it's okay to do stuff like that at this stage. In general, if you were to write a full business plan, you would have a marketing plan as part of that business plan. You would say, okay, I'm going to go to all of these maker fairs. I am going to go to all of these trade shows. I'm going to hire this ad firm to do these ads. I'm going to put in, like sponsor the Facebook 3D printing group. There's all these different things or places you could advertise, and you could build a whole table of the places you're going to spend money on marketing. And that number would be way better than this. This number is just 10% of revenue. It's a placeholder number. It's crap. But for now, it's fine. All right. Corporate tax rate, I just put that in there as 20% of EBITDA. That's going to vary. And that's all the assumptions I have in this model. In fact, for a starting model, that's probably more than you need. And you can see we have a top line, we have revenue, and then revenue, that's the year. What I've done below that revenue line is I have projected, this is the percentage of the total addressable market. I'm assuming that my sales are going to slowly increase over time. And then you actually see here that I have them decreasing because the goal that I'm making for this product is that it lasts a long time. It's very reliable. That's one of the product attributes. I'm not designing this thing to fail and be replaced by the customer. I want it to be a long-lived product. So part of that decision means that I may get to market saturation. Over 5 years, it might be that every single person on the planet who wants one of these, I've already sold them one. So I actually have the assumptions here is that I'm coming up in terms of the percentage of my total addressable market, and then it's actually starting to taper off by year 5. That is a total assumption. It's based on nothing. But again, it's better than nothing. And then I start doing the math, right? So the unit sales is based on the price assumption, and that volume, is based on that percentage and the total addressable. The actual sales here, I'm doing it in thousands of dollars. $975,000 worth of sales, which the cost of goods, the cost of the parts to put it together, and the manufacturing cost is $585. Gross margin of $390 in that first year. Not bad. This does, by the way, bring up a question of timing. I have done this as a year, but if I have to put out the cost, that $585, before I can make the $975, I have a cash flow issue. Good news is I'm doing this on Kickstarter. Kickstarter is basically pre-sales. So I can actually receive the money before I have to spend it on parts, which is a bonus. And then I'm going down through different things: engineering, marketing, payroll, get to my total expense line, get to my EBITDA line, then I have a net profit or loss. And in the first year, I'm making $18,000, basically just break even. All that makes sense? And then as we go along, I start to ramp up. So I go from 10% market share to 20% to 50% of my target, 60%, then back to 40. And you can see that bottom line is how much money I've made in those additional years. That said, the reason why, two things. First of all, making $360,000 in year 5 makes this absolutely not a venture investable business. This is not a company I could go raise money from venture capitals. They would be like, the market's not big enough. And they would be right. The reason I'm interested in this is because I don't have to spend a lot of money to get there. This is a decent business that I can develop under my own power without outside investment. And most business ideas that come through university, if they're crop science things, they don't fit into that category. There's this thing called the valley of death, which is what all entrepreneurs need to face. And it's the fact that you need to spend money at the start before you make any money. Now, I'm not saying I don't have to spend any money. I am spending money on developing this product, but I'm spending my time. I'm basically donating 20% of my time every week. And I am paying out of pocket for prototyping and stuff. But that it's a small, the engineering and development work is, I can take my time with it. I can do it on my own pace. I can self-fund. Then that means don't need to raise any external money. But if you're Interplant, or if you're a medical device company, or you're a renewable energy company, or you are even a mobile app company, you generally want to spend a lot more money than you are making in the early days, in the hopes of making a lot more money and having what you call a hockey stick graph later. And so the other benefit of the pro forma is to see how far you go into the red, and understand what you need to raise in order to get there. What's your maximum negative cash? So, which is that point there. So I've now changed this outlook on my 3D printing pen, and the red line here, this kind of salmon colored line, is I have changed that assumption. And I'm having a hard time moving my Zoom window. But I'm assuming that I need to come up with $500,000 to do the engineering and the R&D. That might be mold tooling, that might be a PCB, assembly line or something. Or I don't have to spend $500,000. That's why I like this idea, but just bear with me, right? You have more engineering cost up front to develop the product now, and you can see what that does to my bottom line. And in this version, you see not only do I have a net profit and loss line, but I have a cash line, and that's a cumulative cash line. So my negative balance from the year before is added to my net profit of the year next to it. And you can see that even though my sales kind of start to outpace that investment in engineering, I end up with $500,000. I end up $500,000 in the hole in year 2. So if these assumptions were correct, then I would have to raise $500,000. I should expect to have to raise at least $500,000, or have $500,000 in my bank account, which I don't, in order to get there, right? You'll also see on the left, I now have what's called a thing that says exit multiple, because if you're taking people's money in order to start a company, you are promising them a return, right? That's the deal. Nobody gets to take investors and then just run a company and be happy and comfortable for the rest of their life. Those investors want to be paid back. They need to be paid back. And so you have this thing. My brother is an entrepreneur. He built a gourmet meat business, called it Keller Crafted Meats. He sold Keller Crafted Meats to someone who is not a Keller. Kate Spade, luxury brand designer, makes handbags and stuff and perfumes and stuff, lamented the fact that she no longer has rights to her own name because she took investors and then had to sell the company. So when you take investment, you have to provide an exit. So now this model says, now I'm worrying about how much am I going to sell this for? Your exit multiple is basically, again, it's a guess. My last company, Inventopia, in that industry, in the packaging industry, I could point to multiple examples of other packaging companies selling to other packaging companies for 8x their EBITDA. And that was just a way of doing it. Medical device companies will often be like 20x. So this multiple can change by industry, and you can find people who have written online about what the right multiple might be for your industry. But here I have, I think 8x EBITDA. And so then the year 5 exit. Now I have placed the gallery view on Zoom underneath the thing. What is it? Sorry. My animations. What does it say the year 5 exit there is? I can't see it on my slide.
3,600.
Yeah, 30. Yeah, so 3 million. So those are in thousands of dollars. So, and the ROIC is probably, what is that? What is that number?
7.23.
There you go. Thank you. So sorry, like on my screen, I can't see where my cursor is. so I can't move the Zoom bar of faces away. Those numbers are low for that's basically saying 7.23. So an investor that comes in and gives me $500,000 based on these assumptions, if I sell in year 5 at an 8x multiple, they will make 7 times their money. That number should probably be 20, given the risks involved here. Very few investors are going to be okay with just a 7x multiple, because maybe 1 in 20 startups actually makes it. So having at least a 20x expected exit is going to be essential. So if this was the reality for this business, I would not move forward with it. It's too expensive to start. The size of the market is not big enough. The top end potential is not big enough. It wouldn't balance, right? The reason why I am doing this is because I can do it in my spare time with the cash I have on hand. It is not a huge cash cow, but I have being able to, pay, have some income. I actually make some money. And from what I understand of the business and what I think it's going to take to run it, it's not even going to be a full-time job. So I am pushing forward with this based on the assumptions here. And I think that's probably as good of an explanation of why these things are important as you can give. Any questions on any of that?
Yes,
All
I again.
Yeah, go ahead.
So okay, so this business model here, if you were to extend the lifetime of that, or like the projections to 10 years, for example, or 8 years, would that still not change the ROIC?
Yeah, I mean, at some point with your assumptions, you have to put a stake in the ground and say, this is my assumption in this model, right? ROIC, that kind of calculation, I did that this way in this example because it was simple. If you're getting an MBA, you may learn of net present value or internal rate of return calculations, and you can certainly do those on the kind of these series of cash flows. Investors will roll their eyes, frankly, when they see that. And yeah, so if you take it out more than 10 years, and again, this is in the context of I'm having investors. Most investors don't want to only make money in 10 years. They want to be selling in 5 to 6. They have a time horizon, in which it's hard for them to do that. Sometimes, like the reason why Interplant gets away with such a long time to market is because the investor is John Deere. It's a strategic investor. It's a technology that's important for them and their other business lines of business. So they're very patient, right? Most investor, if you go on Shark Tank and you say, hey, well, if I sell it in 10 years, it might be much, much larger. They don't care because they want to sell it in 5. Right. And you can show that. I mean, a lot of times what I like to do in a situation like that, a variation on the question you're asking is that I will actually make 3 different charts. If you look at the numbers in green, that kind of growth model, I would have this chart, and then I would duplicate this entire page and then put in a different set of assumptions. Because what if the right number isn't 5%? Maybe the right number is 10% of the big market wants this. And so I could show, the 2% line, the 5% line, the 10% line. I could show different scenarios where I'm growing more aggressively. And I personally like to do that in an investor conversation because there's this, I don't know if it's a game, but I want to call it a game. And I've heard investors say, whatever numbers an entrepreneur tells me, I just cut them in half. Which seems like as an entrepreneur, that should give you license to not be ultra conservative with your numbers. That might say, hey, well, if the investors are going to cut my projections in half anyway, I might as well double them. So I try not to play that game. I try to be very, very, very honest and very transparent with these things. And I think the reason I was so successful at raising money in a really bad market was because I was very transparent with people. Is I said, hey, these are the assumptions. If this is a fizzle, we can expect this. If this is moderately successful, we can expect this. If we can actually change the market and then this is the upside. And you let them decide how aggressive you want to be with the assumptions of your trajectory, your traction, and your exit. Did that answer your question? Okay. So everything I showed you here is the wrong way to do it. That was what all that whole exercise was basically what we call a top-down model. So there's a classic it's like a trope in entrepreneurship, where you can say like, oh, well, there's 35 million people in China, and if I could get 1 in 100 to buy my Coca-Cola, then it's a 30 billion. But if you don't have a plan, I mean, that might be true, the numbers might work out that way, but if you don't have a plan for getting 1 person in China out of 100 to buy a Coca-Cola, it's a zero market. There's an entrepreneur that I spoke to recently who he has customers. He is doing a thing for construction management, specializing in helping Caltrans. And my question for him was, how big of a market is that? And he'd say, oh, well, the Caltrans budget is this. Like, that doesn't answer the question, because that's what they're spending. That's not what they might spend in contract management. You need to give me a number of how many people might buy this software from you, and what your price is, and how many of those licenses can you sell. It's like, well, I already have a couple customers. I'm like, great. Is that out of a total of 4 customers you could potentially ever get? Or is it out of 3,000 customers you can get? Like, without that data, it's nothing. And just giving a top end number means nothing, right? I like to, that said, I like to talk about the potential for entrepreneurship in this town, in the context of, like, agriculture is a $3 trillion industry, I think is the number, right? And Davis is the #1 agricultural research university in the world. Why don't we have agricultural venture capital here? Well, the answer is, we're not actually capturing $3 trillion. It's also, ag is a much harder business model. So there's a number of reasons why that is true, but you really don't want to start at the top end of the market and work your way down. I talked about my marketing budget in that previous example. I just put 10% of your revenue. That's a lazy way to do it. A bottom-up version of the marketing part of my budget would say, I'm going to go to these trade shows, and this is how much it's going to cost me to do that. I'm going to place this many advertisements in this many magazines. I'm going to give a 3D printing unit to these 3 YouTubers who use 3D pens, and that's going to cost me this. And develop a model, develop a plan of what you're tactically going to do every day, and then put a number to that. That's a bottom-up model. In terms of your revenue, it's hard to do when you're early stage, but a bottom-up revenue model would be, I am already selling things. These are the leads I have in my Salesforce.com pipeline, and my rate, is normally that I can convert 10% of my leads into actual sales, and these are my projections based on the actual data I have. That would be a bottom-up. So bottom-up is way better, but if you don't have the data, if you lack the opportunity to build a bottom-up model with specifics, which at this point you may likely not, then top down is fine. Just know that it's a process. And again, when you get those top line data, it's going to light for you. You're going to get to a point as an entrepreneur where you understand your model, your financial model, really well. And so someone says, oh, you know what, that extruder is going to be $40 per, each versus 80. And you know exactly what that means. You could be like, that 80 number, that doesn't work, breaks my model, done. It's got to be 40 or 35. At a certain point, as you go through this and you massage this model, you start to understand it innately in a way that no one else will. And knowing that, and also knowing where your weaknesses are, what you can do to research. When you happen across someone who's in the industry in an elevator, you know exactly what you want to ask them and get that piece of data. And then you plug them back, and maybe you restart your data based on some new piece of information, and you keep revising it and you keep refining it into something that it's very, very real. So that is it. Remember, it's better to be specifically wrong than vaguely right. This is supposed to be an iterative process, but it is better to
Lula, stop.
What was that?
I'm so sorry, Tim. I'm having some dog issues over here. Sorry, I'm trying to, I was like, how do I?
I am sitting, gosh. And yeah, and I think the other thing I would say is that this is a journey, and it's a place where you can ask questions and ask people for help. That's what they're there for. That's not what they're there for, but you'd be surprised by how many people are willing to answer questions if you just ask. One of the things that if you get a grant from the National Science Foundation, they will make you do a thing called the I-Corps program, which is great. And what they do is they train you how to ask questions, and they have you call 100 people who are either potential customers or potential partners. You're not allowed to talk about your solution or pitch anything. You just ask them the important questions about the problem you're solving, and just get feedback, just get data from them. And it's amazing what you learn with that. So anyway, that should be kind of your journey as you do this. Now, any questions additionally on that?
If anyone, I'm watching the chat, so it
Yep.
looks like there is a question here. How do you identify or project possible risks related to business models? Are there methods or ways?
Specific risks, that's a hard one because so I would say this, there are risks and there are blind spots. I would be lying if I didn't say that there is a bit of luck that happens in entrepreneurship. So I told you about VinPerfect, my first startup. I did develop that. I did bring it to profitability. That company failed. The reason I don't have $500,000 in my business is because that company ended up failing, and it failed for a weird reason. It was bad luck. We had a port strike on the West Coast in 2015 that affected the glass supply. We were growing really fast. We had an exit lined up. We had a company ready to buy us. So we were very heavy leverage. We were borrowing a lot of money. And when we had this port strike, it affected our delivery schedule. There were quality issues with the glass, which caused some leakage, and our customers returned the product, even though it wasn't our fault. And even though later on we sued the glass company, and we proved in court and with testing that that the leak that had happened in this customer it happened for a few customers because of the port strike. It was all the glass company's fault. It was not our product. Didn't matter because our financing all of a sudden turned upside down because we had these issues involved that was brought on by a port strike. And that company basically, it was because we had grown so aggressively, because we were so aggressive about growing, and because we thought we had an exit actually brewing, it collapsed. It was like a catastrophic implosion of our financing. Nothing to do with the quality of the technology. Luck. And that stuff happens. So that's one example, right? Maybe hopefully an extreme example. Hopefully you won't have to deal with that, but like those are the things that happens. There's also, especially for very innovative companies, there is this thing that people often point to with timing, where they say, this company was too early. My personal opinion is that when people talk about that, what they're really talking about is a sales process where people don't understand the product, and it takes them time to accept the process. So there's a speed of customer acceptance that is slow. And when you're a startup and you're spending money and you need to get traction and you have enough money in your bank account for 6 months and you need to raise money quick and start showing that you have traction, blah, blah, blah. And if the market is slow to respond, you run out of money. It's like going to Vegas and you bust, you have to leave. The house never busts because they can just bring more chips out. If you bust, you're done. So those are risks. And you can mitigate them. You could have a risk in terms of a competitor emerges that you didn't know of. With VinPerfect, I had this idea and it was great. And I remember after I won the Big Bang business plan competitions, there was like a national finals business plan competition, and coming back from that, we actually won that as well. Coming back, I got a phone call from a guy at a competitive company saying, hey, this thing that you're doing, I invented that 3 years ago. I was like, oh, okay. Now I ended up reading that guy's patents and realized we were doing it quite differently. And so we proceeded. But there's things like that could happen, right? I mean, it could be that someone else who's in a garage parallel to you right now, you have no idea. They're already working on this and they might already have 15 customers and you have no idea. So take all those scenarios and multiply them. Those are all risks. You cannot mitigate them. And that is why you need to have that 20x return, right? Is that there are so many ways that good ideas can fail. I don't think we've even seen every combination of ways that good ideas can fail. It happens all the time. So you just have to build that into your calculus of whether this is worth it. Hopefully I answer that question. If I can find my cursor again. Oh, I can find my cursor. There we go. Is that the only question?
There's some gratitude here in the it's a really very, very informative and useful workshop. And it's really great to be able to hear from a Big Bang winner. The fact that you went through the competition is super valuable, I think. Thank you for all the specific examples and insights. It's been really great. And thank you.
I'll give a specific Big Bang tip. When we won Big Bang, one of the things I had done is I formatted my business plan like a magazine. Some of the feedback I got was that this is the best business plan I've ever read in my 15 years. And it's because I didn't make a boring document. I formatted it like a magazine. Like it was about corks. And it's like, hey, what is Corktain? It was a little side story on the side. And it was like this little story that, rather than trying to fit it into a narrative, I made a magazine. The other thing is, like, if you look at Little Bang is a great place for free money. Like if you have an idea, you can take the Little Bang, you should go and win $1,000. Is it $1,000? Anyway, you should just go and take some money. It's easy to win Little Bang by reading the rules of the contest. I've been a Little Bang judge for years. And most of the people who win money, they're the ones who pay attention to the judging criteria and they make sure they meet the judging criteria. I mean, just that simple. Like, have you called 5 people? Have you clearly, like, is it clear that you talked to 5 real people? Is it on your poster? Yes, it is. Like really easy. Yeah, play to the competition, play to the crowd. And that's not just for the business plan, right? If you go and pitch your business to a certain investor, if you look, they might have a certain portfolio of companies. It might be that they've invested in companies like yours. There may be synergies. You want to tailor your presentation to that investor as well. So that's just a skill. Is like, if what I'm doing is going to be successful, how do I figure out how to tailor it to that opportunity?
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. I mean, Little Bang, unfortunately, the deadline's passed on Sunday. But it is a great opportunity for like easy money. I think if you have a thoughtful idea and you do pay attention to the instructions, I think the Institute's just doing it once a year now instead of 2 or 3 times, which is what they've done in the past. So it'll come back around next February probably, but anyone can attend the competition. That is tomorrow at 6 o'clock. It's in Gallagher Hall, and it's a great opportunity to meet teams that are planning to participate in Big Bang and who may be looking for team members. So it's a really good networking opportunity.
Yeah. One of the great things about that and the Big Bang is especially with regard to the risks related to business models. You're in a place where it's safe to fail, and failure is a great teacher. So, trying something, going big on an idea, and you're still in the nest. It's a safe place to fail where there's a bunch of people who want to help you. It's a great opportunity to take in order to do that.
And it's a great way to get feedback. You know, just to home in on that even more, because as I mentioned, well, I don't actually think I mentioned this, but Big Bang, the round 0 optional feedback round is open right now. So if you have an idea for Big Bang and you're starting to develop your executive summary, or at least have a draft of it, you can participate in the optional early feedback round. That is going to close. The deadline is February 5th, Monday at noon. So, you know, it's really not a heavy lift. You just have to have an executive summary and a bio for each of your team members. And you will get feedback from current MBA, UC Davis MBAs. It's going to be very, very helpful for you to develop your executive summary for round 1 of Big Bang. And that registration deadline is February 26th. So if you're not on Startup Tree already, go ahead and register. And you can, you know, register for the competition there and RSVP for Little Bang. And all of the information is also on the Institute's website. Do any of you have any questions either for Tim or about Big Bang? Okay, I think we can call it a night.
All right.
Thank you again, Tim. Thank you so
My
much for your
pleasure.
time.
Yep. See you same time next year. Oh, actually, I'll see the Big Bang stuff.
Okay,
All right. Cheers.
bye.